2000. A small French video game developer known as Eden Studios released the PlayStation 1 port of the then newest entry in the Need for Speed racing game franchise, Porsche Unleashed. Or just Porsche if you were in Latin America and Germany, or Porsche 2000 if you were elsewhere in Europe. Still a less confusing naming scheme than their previous title, that of course being the still pretty good actually V-Rally 2. Both the PC and PlayStation ports of Porsche Unleashed received pretty good reviews, and even if the PC version reviewed slightly more positively, you've got to imagine that this still fledgling developer would start their next big project with enthusiasm. 2006. A baker's handful of years later, the same developer, now rebranded to Eden Games, would go on to release the game that put the open-world racing genre on the map in Test Drive Unlimited. And even though that game would go on to feature one of the largest maps in gaming at the time, being a sort of reality mixed with creative interpretation because Oahu is too big an island to even remotely accurately replicate on the PlayStation 2, and thus just about everything outside of Honolulu is a ghost town, as well as being praised for the vehicle selection and the amount of things you can do with them, you can't help but feel that there's a pretty significant gap in which... Did they just not make any other games in that period of time? Well, they did make a game in that time, and it was potentially the weirdest game they could have made. V-Rally 3. Kaya Dark Lineage is a game whose biggest claim to fame is that its protagonist is the reason Katara from Avatar: The Last Airbender is named Katara. Why does everything I do always relate back to Mae Whitman? Is it actually her and not Kevin Michael Richardson who's at the center of our universe? Why do I feel like I'm uncovering some big conspiracy here? It's also very much a break from Eden Games' previous output, being a 3D action mascot platformer rather than a racing game. As for why they made this decision, I'm not sure. It could be that the team was simply... It seems I've added a joke in the script and that I'm supposed to say that the team was simply burnt out on racing games and wanted to do something different. It could be that they saw the trends of the PlayStation 2 and wanted to try their hand at something along those lines to see where they measure up. If that's what they wanted to do, there was plenty of competition to go around in 2003. Even just a casual look around will tell you that Naughty Dog was doing anything but jack off after their success on the original PlayStation. Insomniac likewise was about to go commando on the traditional platformer formula, while Sucker Punch, still relatively new on the block, sat in the corner, grinning to itself about how it was about to drop what may just low-key be the best PlayStation 2 game everyone knows of but nobody bought. Sly bastards. And that's just to name quite literally 3 of the many, many action mascot platformers that existed on the PlayStation 2. Personally, I think the reason behind Kaya existing was Atari. Atari was, is, and will always be a simple company. They see the money. They like the money. Okay, so the frequency with which I quote Dimitri from Slide 2 is probably getting on everyone's nerves at this point, but aside from it being fitting in this context, can you blame me? This is a man who's playing I Just Can't Help But Shine, if you know what I mean. And so, it once again falls to me to not only discover if there's anything from this game that ended up finding its way into later products by this developer, but also if a mid-shelf PS2 platformer is worth looking into for anyone unfortunate enough to be watching this without knowing that clicking the big YouTube logo in the top left will take you back to the homepage. The game starts with a cutscene, wherein the camera pans to reveal a framed picture of a child and her dad, with the dad's face crossed out for foreshadowing reasons, before we get a good shot of our protagonist. A noise is heard from beyond the now open door. Ooh. 'Ooh. 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 '
Frank? Frank? Is that you?
Kaya gathers all her courage and steps into the basement, where she is met with a grueling sight.
Kaya!
To make an overly long story short, Frank accidentally opens a portal to another dimension, where the inhabitants are these little fuzzy Lombax knockoffs. You know, if I had a nickel for every time I played a Weird PS2 platformer where a protagonist with daddy issues is transported into the furryverse by means of a teleportation device in the basement, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but surely there are other ways for these mid-shelf games to get the story going. This group of nutbaxers is led by one we'll eventually get to know as Aiton. The game then takes a page out of V-Rally for
Carnival of Pain.
Spoke by starting in media res, with this being a chase scene to teach you the basic controls and problem solving you'll be doing throughout. And this is already where the game starts being interesting. Let's do a little thought experiment. Name a platformer protagonist that can't double jump. Well, we can count out Jack, Ratchet, and Sly immediately because double jumping is just part of their job title. Spyro, I would argue, kinda can't, but then again he can glide, and what is a glide if not a double jump that gets more effective with starting elevation? And then there's the bit where he learns how to hover in the second game, and then he sort of does just learn how to double jump in A Hero's Tale, and then that becomes part of his standard moveset, so Spyro's out. Pac-Man maybe, but even then, in the one world game that matters because it's got infinitely more than the rest, but bouncing does give a bit extra height and length, so I'd call that an honorary double jump. This is kinda difficult. Truly a conundrum. Oh, I've got one! Kaya! The answer is Kaya. It was a trick question. Yup, you're left with a single jump as all you can do in terms of verticality. What that means when the game wants to lock things behind a large gap, we'll get to. Kaya essentially starts the game with the ability to walk, perform a single jump, and kinda, I guess, glide in specifically designated areas. Everything else has to be bought, including the ability to climb. What, you thought the part a few seconds ago where I compared Kaya's abilities to other platformers with kind of a focus on the Spyro trilogy was a coincidence? Nah, this game simultaneously does just about everything Spyro 2 did, while also inspiring a surprising amount of things for the Legend series. While we're still sort of on the topic of climbing, I need to vent about something. In the Spyro trilogy, you climb by jumping onto a climbable surface, at which point Spyro automatically grips on. Good stuff. In the Sly Cooper games, you have to jump and be in the same postcode as a climbable surface, at which point you can press the circle button and Sly will automatically fling himself towards it and grab on. Good stuff. Kaya, for not the last time in all of this, decides not to steal from either of these, and both of them simultaneously. It's fair enough that you have to press the button to climb when you're on the ground. There may be situations where you'll be near a climbable surface without wanting to climb. That's fair enough. But why do I also have to do it if I'm jumping straight at it? And why does it have a timing window that's unnecessarily difficult to pin down? Game mechanics are absolutely something you should steal if you can get it working and it makes sense in the context of your game. In this case, just let me press the grab and climb button a little bit in advance of Kaya actually latching on, and I'd be perfectly happy. Speaking of stealing things from Sly Cooper, it's time for us to stealth around these enemies carrying guns that'll stun-lock you until you die. What, you think me playing the Boneyard Casino theme at this point in the video was an accident? Oh yeah, I should probably explain our enemies a bit. These are Wolfen. What they are more than that, and where they come from, we don't know. All we know is that it's best to avoid them, and that they really like farting. No, really, they cannot control their gas. It's so bad you can even hear it in the intro if you're unfortunate enough.
Look, it's waking up.
After Halo dropping and smashing a Wolfen skull in, we get to the village, where we are introduced to Atea.
Welcome. So,
you're the stranger I've heard so much about. You look confused. I would be too if I were you. Luckily, I'm not you. I'm me.
Tough crowd.
I'll say.
Akasa, and the antagonist of the whole shebang.
Something tells me you got here the same way the other one did.
The other one?
Yes, Alan.
Dad?
Who's found a way to turn natives into warriors for his cause. That's right. Jair Bolsonaro has found a way to weaponize furrydom, and Kaya is the only one who can prevent any more natives, as well as her brother Frank, from being converted to the alt-right. We're told to purchase a boomerang from the natives, because apparently all they live for is selling things, which must be an interesting economy they've got going when everyone wants to sell and nobody was buying before Kaya got here. Finally, the Gadgetron vendor has become the fuzzball.
You'll never regret it.
While we as players ponder if the natives understand the wonders of capitalism, we're ushered off to the forest to find an egg. Yep, that's right, a 2003 platformer just sent me on an egg-fetching quest like it's 2000 all over again. The gameplay is actually surprisingly solid. Until it kinda isn't. See, Kaya isn't just jank, there's levels to it. 9 of them to be exact. Oh, come on! I'm trying to make a video on this game that isn't just, so yeah, for this bit you have to jump on top of the mech and then turn it into a trampoline, something the game tries to teach you in the most awkward way imaginable. Will you cut me some slack? Anyway, 9 levels that consist of the same basic gameplay loop. Beat up Wolfen, go to the Wolfen headquarters, learn that all of them are standing precariously close to a bottomless pit, which is a bit of a problem if Kaya kicks them off and thus can't exercise them, so you need to bait them close to a wall, at which point you can finally lay into them like you're an elementary school bully. They do at least respawn if you do, so they're not lost forever. It's just supremely annoying. The game also really likes putting them in places where you basically can't win unless you think a little outside the box. Shut up! The primary objective of the game is to piece together a portal-hopping medallion so we can return to the real world. To do that, we go down a side route in the forest, are attacked by a bird, and then board for a few minutes to get to a receptacle so we can start piecing things together. Typically, these medallion pieces will be locked behind a fairly simple platforming or combat challenge, and your reward for beating it is a close-up of Kaya's crotch. That and game completion and more magic to work with. Those are important too, I guess. We retrieve the receptacle, and after a more confusing than necessary boss fight, we're off to Hunter's domain. Upon arrival, Atea manages to get himself kidnapped, which somehow isn't the event that tips Jair off to the location of the village, but whatever. Plot contrivance has got a plot contrivance, I guess. Very conveniently, he's trapped in this level, and very conveniently, in order to get to him, we'll need to use these weird birds. These are called jam gods. And my god, is their theme song a jam. I mean, it's nowhere near as much of a jam as... but I'll take what I can get. Short soundtrack tangent. This game falls into roughly the same category as Scalar, by which I mean that soon after playing that game, I replayed Spyro A Hero's Tale and was reminded of how unironically great that game's soundtrack is, which is impressive considering reports that it was put together in about 6 weeks. Kaya follows Scalar's trend in that it has a few that are pretty banging, like the Jam God theme, the boarding theme, and the naming it would be a slight spoiler at this point, so I'll just play a quick snippet. And a lot that are either forgettable or just not remarkable enough within the game to stand a chance of being recognizable out of it. I mean, the main Wolfon battle theme has a handful of different mixes, and I honestly can't place any one of them to a specific level. In short, I wish the soundtrack was more distinctive, but it's an okay package as is. Super bonus tangent. What's going on with all the 12-year-old protagonists in the 2000s? I've already covered how both Spyro and Aang are 12-year-old in a different video. Go watch that, that's genuinely a banger of a video I put together that time. And now the back of the scaler cover suggests to me that Bobby is 12 years old as well? What? Was the 2000s really just this anomalous time where everyone was 12 at some point? I mean, I know I say that as someone who is certifiably a model year 95, but hey, does my point stand or not? We go to beat up a gang of Wolfon, at least 2 of which are armed with guns, a combination I'm pretty sure cements my theory that this game does not in fact take place in an alien dimension, but instead is just live footage from the state of Texas, and die in the process, upon which we get a brief visit from Jair. This is the only real punishment for running out of health. You have to listen to this guy chuckle at you. He's a real chuckle fuck. Next up is a bit more of the same basic gameplay loop and a section where a dog tries to kill you. Side note, the dogs in this game are the worst, especially because they're often placed in extremely cramped spaces where the camera and thus the controls don't work properly. Which is another rant I want to get over with. The camera likes nothing more than getting stuck on every imaginable object in a level, leaving the player to either try to fix it manually or having to navigate around it. It's like nobody ever playtested any of the narrow spaces. After some actually okay Jamgut based puzzles, we reach this random lift, where halfway down, for seemingly no reason, a cutscene plays in which we're informed that there's an No, I'm not doing it. Not again. You can't make me. Who cares about the audience? My integrity as a human being is on the line here. The last tiny shreds of it, yes, but that counts. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean to get all defensive and such. It's just that you leave me no option. Friends? Great. I'm still not gonna say it. So, what I will say is that some things are afoot in Native City. Eventually, we get to the sewer shaft they threw Atea down, where we discover a lever that might just free him. Turns out, it doesn't. It actually opens a fast track straight to the hunter's whereabouts. That's convenient. This is another simple enough boss fight. Whenever the hunter throws a bomb, you throw it back at him. It's literally the Yox from Spyro 2's Metropolis, but you've traded the ice physics for kicking things without an indicator as to how far your kick will go. Not all that difficult once you realize this. With Atea back in the village, it's time for a group powwow.
She brought him back! I told you she'd save him.
Well, if you hadn't been such a coward, he wouldn't have been in danger.
While I was there, I heard them talking about your brother.
Where is he?
Your father has him in his laboratory.
So, Jair has a machine that he uses to transform natives into Wolfon. It uses amber for some purpose. My own headcanon now is that the transformation somehow involves shooting dino DNA at people. The plan is nice and simple. Go to the amber quarry and follow the damn train. So we do that. After we're done with an unrelated adventure that involves a painful segment in which I can't see this elevator because of the amount of sunlight shining through my IRL windows, followed by a quick house invasion and a puzzle that involves hitting one thing and making it and the things immediately next to it change states. You know, like the first puzzle in Idle Springs. Exactly how much did this game steal from Spyro 2? I mean, it's very much worth it in the end, because this is some nasty loot. To get to the quarry, we must first beat the trials of the Wind Tower, which I'm sure must be a rip-off of something and that everyone's screaming what it is in the comments. I actually completed this a bit earlier than intended, hence why there are no enemies on this run. The only noteworthy events on the early run was this one encounter where I could swear I saw that Wolfen clip through the ground and be about to fall into the infinite abyss below. Trust me, you have not seen true fear until you've tried to 100% this game and the Wolfen falls over for no discernible reason. That encounter did also break the music for the rest of the level, which left the Wind Tower feeling more like Planet Umbris than the developers intended. After a start that fakes you into thinking, oh cool, this is going to be one of those levels where I have to deal with radiation damage over time, only for it to turn out that that's just a skill challenge that unlocks the rest of the level, and it's not even any difficult, nor are there any consequences to being bad at it, considering there's a magic refill right at the end of it. We enter the Quarry. Here's where we're introduced to another Jamgut variant. The game will happily tell you that this is a Jamgut with more zoom, but because the game has weird tutorial boxes, guess who didn't know how to activate the nitrous on this thing? So I got creative with the door lock and eventually made it, only to be greeted with a section that requires speed. After way too long, I figured it out. You press and hold the square button. The amount of times this game takes inspiration from PS1 Spyro is honestly impressive. What's also interesting is this whole segment that sees you first having to open the rear door by hitting the targets on the side of the wagon, then hit the target inside the wagon to open the side door, then jump in, beat up the Wolfen inside, open the door to the front wagon, beat up a few more Wolfen, jump back into the lead wagon because of course one of them fell out, get kicked off the train by a big Wolfen on top, climb back up yet again only to find that they're now nowhere to be found, put yourself out of the misery of this section, take time off by playing a very calming stealth section that's fair and balanced if you don't do the side routes first, more dark sections with vague rules for what they can and can't do, eventually get back on track and take advantage of the fact that enemies in this game seemingly has the same fatally allergic reaction to falling more than 10 centimeters that enemies in The Legend of Spyro does, which means you can bait the big Wolfen into falling into the train car itself, from which he then cannot escape, get to the quarry itself, where the game then fails to realize it's supposed to stop playing the Jamgut theme, but that's okay, because that just makes this feel like all the more of a high-stakes mission. Make your way up these platforms while someone's playing the world's largest game of Tetris, and hang on to a wagon again, at which point you come to one shocking conclusion.
We have one advantage that they sorely lack. Zeppelins!
The end of this level also signals the beginning of the end of the second act, as, oh shock and horror, Aton betrays everyone. Whoever could have seen it coming that the one with attention-seeking behavior would be upset by the newcomer getting more attention from everyone. It also leads into a sort of first fight against Jair, a fight that you can beat by going to heal. Not gonna lie, I didn't see that coming. Also, am I the only one kinda getting the Eternal Night vibes from how Golden Crystals just saved the protagonist? Oh, spoilers I guess, but let's be honest, of all the Spyro games out there, this is the one you're most likely to have given up on and just looked up the ending on the internet anyway, so it's probably fine. We go back to find the village in flames, a Jamgut where there definitely wasn't any before, and... okay, listen. One thing is that this sound effect is shared between the two games, but exactly how insistent is this game on doing everything the Eternal Night did? Years before the Eternal Night was a thing. Now we gotta use the Jamgut to catch up and jump onto this gun, which we can then use to shoot the Zeppelin's cannons to create the most Pac-Man world of platforms to help us reach the deck, then free the natives. This sounds simple and awesome enough on paper, until you realize that the game does a grand total of 0 handholding. When I say this, I don't want the game to completely autopilot the everything. What I'm saying is that it'd be real nice if the game could fine-tune the positioning of the jam gut while I'm stood on it about to the Fast and the Furious my way onto the ship. Things like being able to automatically align itself with the nearest platform so I have to make the least awkward jump possible. That would be mighty helpful because of the previously mentioned lack of Kaya's general jumpiness. With everyone safe and sound, we learn that Jair is most likely operating out of the Forbidden Island. Terrific naming convention here, guys. And to get to that, we get sidetracked for about 2 hours in the airpost, in which all that happens is some gameplay. That could be worse. I could be collecting random documents and audio logs. Instead, here I am, trying to guide a Mikan through an obstacle course or a bottomless pit and glitching through windows to progress the game. We eventually make it to the big cannon that's going to fire us to the Forbidden Island, and arrive to discover... Oh, you have got to be kidding me. A PlayStation 2 platformer whose secret hideout is a volcanic wasteland. Again? What are you... Okay, alright. Let's assume for a second that this isn't the final level. That doesn't make it not Munitions Forge, though. Some frustrations with fluctuating lava levels, and a little bit of animal cruelty. Later, we get a very fair and balanced boss fight against a Frank who's just been converted to the alt-right, and thus now has access to the nuclear launch codes that are his fists. This is where I'm making another brief aside to note that throughout the game, you have to buy magic friendship bracelets that let you punch harder and in different ways by pressing different buttons. And even somewhat solves the biggest gripe I had with this game while playing, by unlocking a powerful move with a range greater than 10 centimeters in front of Kaya's face and absolutely no further. This isn't Ratchet and Clank where the wrench stretches out to 3 times its own length to give your melee hit some distance. Because I failed to realize that holding the guard and punch buttons charge an attack that apparently does a lot of damage. Yep, the game's got an unnecessarily convoluted combo mechanic, so we can check that off the list of prerequisites for a beat-em-up action platformer. A shame you're not really going to see me use it, as it's much easier to simply press the square button to punch, triangle to kick, and cross to leap over enemies' faces. We eventually convince Frank that furries are second-rate citizens and thus should not be allowed to vote in this fine world that we call the 1700s, which causes him to immediately drop the act so he can do like the rest of the youth. Vote for the politician who posts the most pictures of their Porsche on Instagram. Frank reveals that Jair has built a portable version of the transforming machine, instantly validating all of my references to Ratchet and Clank. It's also where we learn that the final piece of the medallion is, of course, in the heart of enemy territory. Remember that bit about the receptacle and the piecing the medallion back together? Yep, most of that plot and gameplay isn't all that interesting, so not unlike the game, I'm just gonna bring it back in now. Some truly thrilling gameplay later, and we reach Wolfen City, where Wolfen that will not hesitate to resort to their stunlock gun if given half the chance also really like taunting you by standing close to the edges of bottomless pits. On our way to confront Jair, Kaya is careless for a moment and is captured in an ambush and sentenced to forever remain imprisoned in the ghost hole, where the following exchange takes place.
You're a monster! You're inhuman!
Interesting choice of words.
But of course, the game doesn't end there. You see, the Wolfen are somehow dumber than the people defending Gran Turismo 7, and thus it's not hard to trick your guard into breaking the cage for you. This is now a one-person prison break, where the first order of the day is to break further into the facility to recover all of your gear, otherwise you'll never be able to punch someone in the face ever again. This, thankfully, doesn't last all that long, and after completing a basic stealth section, yeah, remember when we had to do stealth for the whole first level and subsequently only used it to sneak up on overpowered gunners, and unwillingly dropping a Wolfen into a bottomless pit? We're reunited with our gear, and after a few more dog-related frustrations, we can finally leave. That is, once you figure out how to not just open, but break out of this door. Throughout my journey of playing this game, unnecessarily elaborate door-locking mechanisms just seem to keep popping up. You've got stand on a plate and throw the boomerang at a switch doors. You got have a mechan stand on one plate and you on another doors. You got stand on a plate and use the Visa boomerang to pull a lever elsewhere doors. There's this single stand on a plate, try to spam the boomerang on a single target and hope the game takes mercy on you trying to do so door. Honestly, Why not just a lock and key like normal folks? And people say I hate The Legend of Spyro. Well, have I got something to tell you? Come close to the speaker. Closer. Come on, you can get closer than that. If I genuinely hated The Legend of Spyro, then why would I quote and make references to it as often as I do? What's that? Oh, you didn't get close to the speaker because you thought it was going to be a I shout into your ear bit? How unempathetic do you think I am? I'm a pretend internet funny person who isn't funny, not a Gran Turismo 7 fanboy. One botched bomb delivery later, and we're ready to head back to the village and unpack everything with the gang.
Does it really matter that you're not completely human?
Yes, I'm a freak.
A freak? Who are you really? Think about it. You've protected us. You fought a powerful enemy. You've mastered the art of magic. And you've saved your brother. You are more than a simple human. You are a link, a living link between two worlds.
Imagine the alternate world in which that had been the name of this game. I mean, not a lot would have changed, considering Atari went bankrupt and nobody gave much of a toss about this game anyway, but still. Fun thought, isn't it? Another complicated method of keeping intruders out follows before we set sight on our final level. Welcome to Midnight Mountain. Nope, welcome to the Mountain of Math. Oh, for the love of... Walking through a short tunnel leads us into the single largest, most difficult combat encounter this game has to offer. Yeah, that bit I did literally a few seconds ago where I referred to this as the Mountain of Malifor. Once again, I don't do things without a good reason, and just so we're on the same side, this combat encounter might be easier if you remember and experiment with the many combo moves this game has, and or realize that you have a gigantic save zone beyond this door. In many ways, it's a bit like this encounter in the Eternal Night. Told you I wasn't done referencing this. Except with so many more layers of nonsense. After briefly being stuck in a trash compactor and having to deal with the game's signature wonky wall jumping that makes a wall non-climbable when you fall off of it for failing the invisible QTE but then forgets to make it climbable again once you've hit the ground, which has been very much appreciated throughout this playthrough, by the way. Thank you very much, game. We take down a wolfanified Aten without too much trouble. No, seriously, the fight against Frank is tougher. After which JR decides it's time to initiate Operation World Select menu, which causes the lava to start rising and Kaya to have to speed platform her way to the top. What? Hold on. Of all the times you could have chosen to rip something off of Sly Cooper, it took you until the final level, at which point all you could come up with was, let's just copy the sinking peril bit of the Cold Heart of Hate. But, you know, with way less drama and flair. I mean, this part plays the same sort of gloomy ambience as the rest of the final act so far. Why did you stop short at the bit where making this final segment means pumping it full of banging tunes that makes it memorable? We arrive at the top of the Krakarov volcano for a final showdown. An epic battle where I still can't do better than basic punching and kicking, and where JR does the absolute minimum of telegraphing. All of which means that this fight becomes a little bit like a sadomasochist's version of the first phase of the Gaul fight. You have to wait for JR to make an attack that you know leaves him vulnerable for a moment or two, then use that to punch him in the face. Rinse and repeat for a fight that, because I died and save stated a bit, took somewhere around 30 minutes. Eventually, Cheese perseveres, JR is knocked into the lava like he's, oh I don't know, pick one. Kaya returns to the village and gets a hero's reception from the excited natives, and Frank, whose animation failed to load. And we get the most non-ending I've ever seen.
Your father was the only one who had some answers about the medallions, where they come from, how they work, and of course, how to choose a specific world to go to. If you want, you can stay here with us.
That's kind of you, but I don't know. Frank is waiting for me near the altar.
Thus leaving it intentionally vague, and then there's leaving out any and all sort of conclusion whatsoever. Yes, if this was my usual 10 minutes something video, I would be tempted to do my favorite bit and smash cut to the overly elaborate and painfully disappointing credit sequence mid-sentence to carry on from that, but I've got a bit more to say about Gaia Dark Lineage yet. It's actually surprisingly alright. Until it decides it has to learn all the pitfalls of 3D action platformers firsthand. Overall, I'd probably rank it about a high C tier. It does a few interesting things that help it be more memorable than it probably should be, but it is a bit hampered down by its desire to not learn much from the rest of the genre. Not unlike the last game of this ilk I played, I can only really recommend this if you've already completed at least 2 of the Jack, Ratchet and Sly trilogies and can deal with the near-endless amounts of jank. I suppose it would be a little remiss of me to not mention that there is, or at the very least at some point in time was, an Unreal Engine fan remake of this game in the works. It seems that progress on this has kinda slowed down / stopped, but if it is still happening, I have 2 comments I'd like to pass on to the developers. Number 1, good luck, and I salute you for doing this. And number 2, please learn from the mistakes that the original made, and don't just wholesale copy the everything. Like, say, the climbing. Steal from Sly Cooper. Do it. So, with a game that's ultimately as promising as this was, you'd think they'd make a sequel that fixes all the issues, right? Well, no, this was an Atari game, and we sort of went over what that means in the beginning. The only other notable non-driving game developed by Eden would be 2008's Alone in the Dark, which apparently has a gimmick where you manually aim your melee weapons. A gimmick that Mini-Me once described as a sloppy implementation of a not terrible idea in a game that's very janky to play and struggles with the basics. Call me crazy, but I'm starting to sense a theme. Hey, I recognize that font and those effects. Can you guess from where? And can you tell that this is foreshadowing? I'm not talking about actually playing and beating Alone in the Dark in the foreseeable future. Oh no, the PS2's got way too much other good stuff for me to even consider that right now. And while Eden Games would obviously go on to release the critical darling that is Test Drive Unlimited, this was the only time, before or after Atari's bankruptcy, this company, and most of the people within it, would develop a platformer. However, just a couple of kilometers away, in another part of Lyon, lay the headquarters of another video game developer, whose bread and butter was developing platformers for the PlayStation 2. I can almost guarantee you, this was the developer you were all hoping I was talking about when I teased this video in the community posts. Yes, that was a deliberate bait and switch, and no, I'm not sorry. Buy the Pigeon Detectives may not be a hit for everyone, but thankfully we live in a world where you're free to like whatever you want, including this game, and nobody can do anything about it. Unless, of course, what you happen to like is a person occupying a similar space on the gender spectrum as yourself, in which case the right wing is willing to spend millions to dehumanize you. Yep, it's not even a Spyro video, but I still managed to segue into anti-conservative messaging. Because conservatives can suck my dick. Now, if you'll excuse me, as I've now taken another good half an hour or so to get all 260 Wolfen in the game, I'll just quickly save my game and get the total amount of my life I'm never getting back. Oh, this is too good. See, what's funny is that with all the save states and aimlessly running around and all that, my final playtime is still a minute off. And now people are gonna think that I meant for this to happen. On the next episode of What French-Speaking Developers Did on the PS2, we finally answer the one question Alanis Morissette never knew she wanted to ask. Isn't it ironic that a company by the name of Strange Butterflies eventually made Sparks look like the— Oh god, what is that? Get that demon off of my screen! Ah!